Hello, everyone. I hope you're all having a fantastic day so far. Today, I want to talk about a topic that was inspired by me by an American YouTuber talking about the whole fact that the system is rigged and this is why you're struggling and ways in which you can overcome it. So I thought I might do a UK version. I am not no financial advisor or anything like that. I'm just a simple guy who is sharing this information. But the aim, of course, is obviously for you to have some level of awareness and then decide whether you want to further do some research, get an actual professional to support you within this space. But I'm just throwing some ideas. So there are three different bits I want to kind of like talk about. So, why the system is the way it is, and, sort of like what you can do to sort of overcome it. So the first thing is that as an employee, as somebody who's working a 9 to 5, you're going to have to pay taxes. You're going to have to pay taxes. And it's the first thing that comes out of your pay. Three things are guaranteed in life. People are born, they die, and they'll pay taxes. Those three things are guaranteed. And so why do we pay taxes? We pay taxes to fund our state, to fund our government, so that it can produce and provide public sector services that are worthy, that support the people. So supporting things like, wealth or health inequalities as an example, or things surrounding health and social care, or housing, etc., etc. So this is why we have these different departments in government. And so taxes are supposed to support that. However, we know taxes are a lot within this country, the UK. Okay, and I think I saw a piece of content that stated that the UK is now placed the 23rd most unhappiest place to live, going from 19th to 23rd. So yeah, there's low morale right now. But it means that you don't get a chance when you're taxed as an employee to essentially really make your taxes efficient. Okay, so anything that is pay as you earn, that's what PAYE is centered around your national insurance, your income insurance. What else is there? There's pension. There's all of that kind of stuff there. It's taken off straight away. Meanwhile, there are investors, business owners, all of these different people who gain less tax. And I'm not even talking about making it more efficient or avoidance or anything like that. They're just taxed less anyway. Okay? And they pay themselves through dividends. And of course, they are taxed on capital gains. They are they're taxed in terms of corporation tax. There's personal tax as well. There's all these different taxes that they have, but because of the incentivization to start business and make it viable, the system is kind of saying that actually, business is quite important for the infrastructure for the country. Now, it doesn't mean to say that one is lesser than the other or whatever it may be. But it's interesting how the tax system has defined choice. It's given entrepreneurs a bit more of a choice, or business owners or organizations a bit more of a choice, whereas employees, there is no choice. It's either you go with our system or you go and do your own thing. Like, we don't care either way, sort of thing. And so that is really important to understand, because then you can see that there is a clear discrepancy and divide. Because you could be working like 60-hour weeks, okay, as an employee, but you're still going to get taxed a huge amount. You could be making, I don't know, 150k a year, 100k a year, 80k a year, 75k a year, but you're in a higher bracket of tax, which means you don't really have that same take home. Whereas a person who is working just as hard, okay, is building their own business, and at the beginning they're not even getting paid. But they eventually get to a point where they get paid, but then the tax breaks are different. So it's bearing in mind, like, the system has kind of designed it this way based on how tax has been created. The next thing I want to talk about in terms of like why the system is keeping us struggling is this whole idea of debt culture. So banks, other sort of organizations, they profit off our struggle. They profit off us using debt. And of course, if you see the rise in debt usage or credit card usage, I think it was back in the United States in the 1950s, you'll realize there's been a heavy reliance on it ever since, you know? And so there are things like Klarna now, okay, where people rely heavily on Klarna, or Monzo Flex as an example. That's another thing that people rely on. There's car financing, you know. I've kind of like, you know, I have my car or whatever it may be, but it's getting to a stage where I've outdone this car, so might have to explore that option too. But the point being made is we're in a subscription society. We're in a society of consumerism. We're in a space of focusing heavily on allowing debt to set us free. Now, debt isn't always bad debt. There's good debt as well that helps us create wealth for sure. But 9 times out of 10 is because we don't have this element of delayed gratification. We want things now. And therefore, we are consuming things on a heavy level. I've got a stat here that says that the average UK household credit card debt sits at around £2,300. This was from the Office of National Statistics 2024. And so, you know, that's one thing. But what creates this debt? What makes it even more painful? Interest payments. I'm telling you, that's what allows people to stay in a dunya for a long time. And some people just don't have a choice. Because of the conditions that have been set up, they will forever be stuck in debt. And that debt will be passed on to their children and their children, etc., etc. So people just start to inherit debt. So there is that to think about. So banks really call the shots. I spoke about the bond market before. And I spoke about these big corporations and everything else in terms of how countries like the UK rely on private organizations to essentially buy bonds from them. But obviously, these sort of like individuals or private organizations request some sort of annual return in terms of their interest rate, maybe a 4% as an example, which then has a knock-on effect on all of us in terms of our mortgages, credit cards, etc., etc. So interest rates, debt, consumerism, the banks, they all kind of like define this whole level of debt, this environment of debt. The other things to say is jobs insecurity, okay? So a lot of people stay in roles out of fear. So we're living in a very difficult time. And look, by the way, me saying this stuff, this is not a criticism, by the way. I'm just relaying sort of like what was said based on this American YouTuber, and actually providing it in a more objective standpoint and relaying it back to you. This is not a criticism, because all this stuff is very understandable as to why people feel the way they feel, okay? Because everything around them is showing them this stuff. So because of that, people stay in the same positions. There's no growth. There's no growth. I learned very early on that, and of course this was outside of a less harsher socioeconomic sort of time, that I'm not going to rely on promotions and all of that stuff there, because there is this mindset, especially within the public sector, that you need to hang around forever. Nah. I'm going to gain the skills and experience that I need and then find another job. But people are scared to do that for obvious reasons. They may have just had a new child. They may be single parent. They may have dependents. There may be certain bills or rents that have gone through the roof. So it's like, me quitting is a risk, because I don't know the culture of the new organization. I don't know some of this other stuff. Obviously, you should know the potential pay bracket and stuff, but there is a fear. And so no risk, no reward in that sense. But of course, where there is risk, there is potential sort of like failure as well. There's also people who don't want to walk away from employer benefits. Okay, so people live for benefits. This could be healthcare benefits. This could be shopping benefits. This could be benefits with car and taxation, whatever it may be. I say taxation, maybe that's not accurate. But there are benefits that one has, maybe even insurance, that these organizations provide. And so it keeps people there. The whole idea of a career was initially established, I think, within the finance sector in the early 1900s. And the aim was to keep people within a space, okay? Because there creates a certain level of stability within an organization. And most workers haven't necessarily seen real-term wages growth since 2008. I mean, there has been growth, okay? Hear what's being said there. And this is a stat from the IFS of 2023. So there has been growth, but it hasn't grown in line with inflation. So inflation is the rate at which products and services increase, and they use the consumer price index to measure what inflation looks like. There's core inflation, and then there's inflation, so to speak. And so that's another way of saying that there is a deep squeeze. Things are expensive, but we're not getting paid for what we need to really get paid for. And the final thing I want to talk about within this whole sort of like why we're struggling, okay, is this idea around consumerism, okay? So it's lifestyle over assets. So because of everything that I've just described, because it feels so hard, people are like, YOLO, innit? You only live once. And so let me book my next holiday. Let me book tickets for Chris Brown. Let me go see Usher. Let me go to this restaurant. Let me, do Hakkasan, all of this kind of stuff there, whatever it may be. Like, there is all this stuff that we're looking to do in order to just forget and relax and just live life. It's understandable. It's your money. You get to do what you're doing. And so with that in mind, there is this just constant pressure. There is this social pressure because everyone's feeling it. Oh, do you want to do this? Oh, come on, you're boring. And why do you want to stay at home? Why do you want to? There's this pressure. There are these ads flying about all the time. You may have even seen an ad watching this video. Okay. There is this influencer culture. So people act and behave a certain way, and therefore it incepts the minds of individuals who feel like they're lacking. They feel like they're not good enough. This is by design. I mean, if you think about, you may have seen the documentary around social media, how it's been designed this way, because obviously they want more clicks, and more attention means higher valuations for that social media platform, because the investors basically want to get a bang for their buck, and so they want to satisfy their investors, but obviously be successful in what they're doing, while simultaneously potentially ruining people's lives. Now, this is an oxymoron because I'm part of that problem, because I'm producing this content, I'm using this platform, but I'd like to think that I'm doing this in a empowering and educational way with a little bit of entertainment too. And so there's a knock-on effect. There's this feeling of, again, FOMO, etc., etc. It says here the average Brit spends about £1,000 plus a year on takeaways and subscriptions. So this is a stat from YouGov 2024. So you're encouraged to basically consume but not create. Okay, you're encouraged to consume but not buy assets. We're not learnt to do this stuff. We're not taught to do this stuff, and therefore it becomes a bit of an issue. So in the next section, I want to talk about what are key sort of like wealth killers. So the first thing is inflation without income growth. So I spoke about this before in terms of the squeeze and everything else. So currently inflation is, what is it right now? I want to say around 3% or so, but you can check that for yourself. But essentially, it hasn't gone down to that 2%. So it's on the rise. It went really high during the pandemic at around between 9 to 11%, which is crazy. We were in a crazy inflationary environment. But that's because of a really big sort of like socio-economic sort of like situation that affected things. So that's the first thing. The second thing is to say that the £100 that you once had, let's say in 2020 or in 2015, does not cost you the same, does not buy you the same stuff. It just doesn't. That's why inflation is inflation, because the rate at which products and services increase is high. So for example, bread may have been, let's say £1 before. Now you're getting bread at £1.30 as an example. So there is a challenge and there is an issue with affordability, especially if your wages haven't increased. The other thing to note is that the financial literacy of things is a difficulty. Okay, we are not taught to understand how to manage our finances. So thinking about things in these sort of sections as an example, how to essentially review a profit and loss spreadsheet, how to produce your own, how to produce or even look at I think it's a balance spreadsheet. Again, correct me if I'm wrong, because I've got it wrong before in the past, but I know what I'm saying. I can see it in my head. We haven't been in a situation where we've been able to understand how to, again, find the right insurances or right cover or right protections. We haven't put ourselves in a position where we understand pensions. We don't understand, again, savings and cash ISAs or stock ISAs or whatever it may be. There's all this stuff. Like, we don't understand the mechanisms and the mechanics of how things work. And so we are sort of thrown all of this fiscal or financial language, expected to understand it, especially when it comes to the small print. But thank God we've got people out there, and this is where social media comes into play as a good force, who teaches us stuff centered around how we can better equip ourselves from a financial literacy standpoint. And so this is why we're winning a bit more. The other thing I want to say is that because this is not taught in schools, and because there is this thing called transgenerational habits, which is basically passing on habits from one generation to another, there are lots of people who are put in a situation where even if they are knowledge smart, they still don't overcome some of their transgressions when it comes to finances, and therefore they're not able to escape or set themselves free. And so maybe the only options they see is entrepreneurship, okay, as an example, as opposed to other conservative approaches that you may be able to take. And I guess finally, because we're in a system, okay, where employees have their PAYE taken out straight away, okay, their taxes taken out straight away, we don't even know, like, what is tax efficiency, okay? What is that? Because most things have income tax applied to it, national insurance, and VAT, okay? But again, business owners don't necessarily have the same setup. So if you're not leveraging sort of like, I would say tax efficient sort of like setups when it comes to setting up a SIP as an example through your limited company, SIP is a self-invested private pension, then you're going to be missing out. So there are things you can still set up a limited company and create tax advantages for certain things depending on how you're set up, etc., etc. The point being made is that this is not entirely your fault, but we're all adults, and depending on what we want to do and what our aims are, we can start to flip the script a little bit, okay? It takes time, but we can start to flip the script. And I'm definitely going through this process myself, so I'm not going to act like I've escaped the rat race or, you know, I've come out of the matrix and all this kind of stuff there. But there are signs, for sure. So first thing that if this person was saying, at least in this video I was talking about, is that you need to find ways to park your money. You need to find ways to park your money. That's going to be a really, really important thing. So, you know, the first sort of level of this is finding savings accounts that have the highest level of interest, okay, that you can get on your money. So you can look at things like Trading 212. I think currently, as of talking to you, they have a cash ISA sitting at 4.5%. There are other sort of like banks that offer different cash ISAs. So there's all that kind of stuff. So your money's growing for you. And of course, if you're a business owner, you could do the same thing. If you've got taxes that you need to pay, you can put, let's say, for example, your personal taxes into a cash ISA. So you're making money on the amount that you owe to HMRC. Okay, so that's one way of sort of like gaming the system, so to speak. Another thing to consider is investing in some sort of index fund. Okay. And you've heard this many times before, you know, the S&P 500s, etc., etc. Now, you could be alternative and different if you want to be in terms of an index fund, but why? I mean, investing is boring. Just consistently stick to something that gives you 8 to 12% returns each year if you're consistent. And this is where dollar pound, what's it called again? Is it dollar averaging or pound averaging or dollar cost averaging? I think that's what it's called. Dollar cost averaging comes into play, where regardless of whether you get an up or down movement, okay, so you're always going to get some level of volatility. Over time, it averages out to be an increase, okay? So this is why it's really important. You don't just put in money once and then hope for it to grow. You keep on doing it, okay? So maybe you invest. Maybe you start off with £50. Maybe you go up to £100. Maybe you go to £200. Maybe you can afford £500. Whatever you decide to do, you commit to it. So don't overextend because now you're trying to get into a situation or position where you're trying to set yourself free. This is minimum five years up to like 20 years, okay? So think about this stuff as well. And again, when you're investing in something like this, you may start to consider other sort of things you can invest in. So for example, this may be stocks and shares, okay? or an exchange traded fund. So the difference between all of these, an index fund is basically an index of a number of different companies that are performing, okay, within a specific industry, sphere, or genre, or country, or whatever it may be. Okay, so the S&P 500 is, I think it stands for Standard and Poor, but I'm not sure. You can check that for yourself. Is essentially the top 500 performing companies within the US. The FTSE 100 is the top performing 100 companies within the UK, but you can see over the last decade, it hasn't been performing. It's just been a flat line. So there's no discrimination here in terms of what you can invest in. If you don't have a Trading 2 account, then definitely check it out. I think I may have a link below, so check that out as well. And so there's that to bear in mind. But exchange traded funds are a bit more niche. So for example, you may want to invest particularly in healthcare or health tech or tech, or I don't know, the oil and gas industry, whatever it may be. And so you've got a group of different organizations that are focused within those different niches where you can invest in. Okay, and then you've got stocks for specific organizations, okay, stocks and shares, where you're betting on the growth and performance of that company or organization. And of course, there's more risk in that because you're betting on only one, okay? But you have to decide whether you want to set yourself up in terms of accumulating your wealth, in terms of your ETF, or sorry, not even your ETF, your stocks and shares, okay, for that organization, or whether you want to have a distributing setup where you actually get paid dividends on a quarterly basis or whatever it may be based on the performance of that specific stock and share. So something to bear in mind, okay, and how you want to look at this stuff. So that's really in the whole sort of like assets department. Notice I'm not talking about property or any of that stuff there. I mean, that's a whole thing in itself. I know people do rent to rent and their sources and all that kind of stuff, but this is just simpler. It's just simpler to think about. And so I'm thinking about the quickest route. Okay, it's not quick. It's never quick. But the easiest route that you can take that doesn't require necessarily a huge learning curve. But of course, get yourself educated, speak to an advisor potentially. But you can do this yourself. You know, it just requires a bit of education. But if it's just the S&P 500, focus on that. So that is consistent. That is something that you don't need to look at anymore because you've decided what your strategy is. The second thing you could do is start to think about how can you utilize yourself to create a high income skill, okay, that provides a solution for someone. And of course, this requires your time. This requires your time. So this may be contracting outside of IR35. And I say that specifically, of course, it depends on how many contracts are out there. But I say this specifically because you may be an employee and contract on the side. You can do that. It just means you have to have a limited company, an accountant who advises you well. And essentially you've got the right sort of setup. But of course, there is something to think about in terms of double tax. And this is why you need the accountant to come into play. But maybe you produce a high income skill in terms of contracting, okay? Maybe there is freelance consulting, okay? Or being a freelancer. So maybe you go on something like Upwork or People Per Hour, I think it's called, where you provide additional services, okay? Maybe you go onto other marketplaces. Just do a sort of type into Perplexity or ChatGPT and let it just produce or find the information for you and then go from there, just expand. That's another thing you could do in order to sort of develop skills. Maybe you want to get additional income through social media. Now, that is a bit of a slog for sure, you know. If you have a YouTube channel or TikTok channel, you can get additional monies based on the numbers of subscribers that you have. So I think for YouTube it's 1,000 subscribers minimum and 4,000 hours of watch time over the year, each year. Can you be bothered to do all of that stuff? It really comes down what you're looking to do in terms of your lifestyle. So maybe social media is a way to do it. Maybe you use social media to do some level of coaching, okay? You know, and be specific and niche about it because the niche is going to be important. So maybe you want to do some level of career coaching for people within a public sector, okay? Maybe you want to focus on doing some sort of health coaching for individuals who suffer from type 2 diabetes. So there are niches that you can explore, and heavily that will be based on you as a person. We don't want to like overdo it, but we want to have an understanding of what we could do to generate additional incomes the first thing I spoke about in terms of the passive income is essentially something that doesn't heavily need to be checked or watched. You may review things every 6 months or so to just see how your investments are doing, and then you can do something called rebalancing, or should I say, with this one, it could take 6 to 24 months to make that additional income that you're looking for, minimum. So you have to put in work whatever you do, okay? So there's things to be thinking about there, but keep it lean. So it's thinking about how can you be more of consultant minded as opposed to just purely employee minded. You don't have to leave your 9 to 5 and all that kind of stuff there, but you want to be nice, okay? You want to be nice. The other thing I want to say is that, you know, when it comes to all of this stuff, you have to find ways to essentially automate and simplify what you're doing, okay? So maybe you have some sort of like Zapier connections if you're technically inclined that way, or make.com or Nathan or whatever it may be, in order to satisfy some of the coaching and consulting elements that you're looking to set up. I think the point I'm trying to make is that there are potentially two different avenues that you can go down. You can go down the investment route, okay, or you can go down the more consulting, coaching, mentoring, advisory route as well to make that additional incomes. And if you decide actually you want to make this your full gig, then of course you can, provided that the marketplace shows you that is the case. But if not, then it's okay to do your 9 to 5 as well, but the top up is needed. And I'm saying this to say that if the system relies heavily on your taxes and relies on you to basically be in a 9 to 5, etc., etc., you're happily, of course, providing to the state, okay? But at the same time, it means that you potentially may be suffering when it comes to your surplus income or your additional income. And so to top that up, it makes sense to invest, okay? It makes sense to put your money into some sort of ISA, okay? Whilst we have it in terms of the threshold at the moment, it makes sense to potentially look at a 9 to 5, not 9 to 5, a consulting or coaching setup, okay? It may mean that actually you find another job to make more money. You know, you develop some level of resilience or mindset development so that you get to a point where actually you apply for a job that makes you 10 grand more, 20 grand more a year, whatever it may be. Maybe it's that you actually invest in some sort of training. So maybe you go down the sort of like organization route. You ask your employee to do it because they have to spend 5% of their levy. I think, no, levy payments, levy contributions are 5% of, I think it's the gross income of the organization or something like that. But the point being made is they have money towards a training budget. Pester them. If you don't want to wait, or if you can afford it, then you pay for it yourself so that you get to the next step. So always think about, what does my earning potential look like given my current situation? And that's how you do it. That's how you start. That's how you grow. That's how you maintain. That's how you do all these different things. You want to put yourself in a position of power and strength. It's hard. It requires patience. If you do have debts, you tackle those debts first. Whether you go via the snowball method or the avalanche method, you can check those up for yourself to see what works. And you stay disciplined. You don't move. You don't waver. You focus on paying off that debt first, aggressively. Then you move into the next stage, which is, okay, how do I better develop myself? And then you start investing in things, whether it's your time or your money, in order to make more money. And that was it, really. I mean, there wasn't anything else. This isn't some sort of grand video talking about some unknown thing. It's just a reminder to start, to get started, especially in these times. But if you can't get started on the additional income bit, sort out your current bit. What can you get rid of? What can you change? What can you improve? Like, just have that sort of mindset for those who want to listen. So hopefully this has been helpful. Again, if you want to see more videos centered around these types of topics, portfolio careers, consulting, etc., don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell. And as always, my friends, understand, reach, and expand. Peace.